What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like it a magic over here on the YouTube.com, and today we're going to, of course, talk about some Ravnica Alegiance spoilers. Why would I be dumb enough to talk about, like, literally anything else right now? Well, I've got a sweet deck for you guys now. We're going to talk about some spoilers, because today was super freaking hype. There's some really, really cool stuff we got to see today, and there's like over 20 cards we got to talk about. So let's go ahead and get to it in sort of loose ascending order. Now, we'll start the day with a couple of limited noteworthy items, but I'm not going to spend too much time on stuff like Bullrat Clan Crusher. Clan Crusher's 5 mana, 3 a red and a green for a 4/4 Ogre Warrior, and you can tap him, remove a +1/+1 counter from a creature you control to have Crusher deal 2 damage to any target. Any target is pretty good. Sometimes this guy will amount to a 2-for-1 in a game. You can just snipe small creatures in sealed or draft with this guy, and he seems pretty decent, but do remember, even if you're taking out small guys, you're still taking some of the power off of your side of the battlefield. But at the same time, even though that does make me a little bit wary of him, he's still a really sturdy body, and there are going to be games where he takes out more than one creature over the course of a game. So it's a really, really solid card for limited here. But let's move on, because we got to have a meeting with the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Basilica Bellhaunt right here is 4 mana. It's one of these things. 2 white, 2 black for a 3/4 Spirit. Spirit confirmed, ladies and gentlemen. We can actually use the Spirit Lord now. When Bellhaunt enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card, you gain 3 life. Well, this is actually a really, really good ETB trigger, and I am all for value creatures. You know that about me, but I'm not sure about the body. A 4 mana 3/4 isn't bad by any stretch, but it's also not the best body at its mana cost, and I'm not sure how it lines up with the format. But if you can play it on turn 4, it negates a lot of the damage that aggro has probably done to you up to that point, and it gives you a pretty decent body to block with too, and it makes them discard a card, which is obviously the best thing about the card. But you know, compare this to something similar like Nicol Bolas. I'm not sure that you have a standard playable card here. It may depend on the deck, but it is a very fine limited playable card, and it's kind of like the best Ravenous Rats or Burglar Rats that we've seen in a long time. A little bit tough to cast, but really, really good in the limited environment, I would imagine. Now, from there, it kind of becomes difficult to gauge what the next quote-unquote worst card is in all the stuff that we saw today, because the hype really ramps up from here on out, you know. But I'm going to go with High Alert, because I don't think that this is the most standard playable card in the world. But who knows? This obviously makes Arcades a lot better. Let me read the card to you real quick, because I'm going to have to do a little bit of translating here. It's 3 mana, 1 a white and a blue for an enchantment. Creatures you control deal damage with toughness rather than power. Creatures you control can attack as though they didn't have a defender. And you can pay 2, a white and a blue, to untap target creature. Okay, so again, this kind of held for the Arcades deck. Although it doesn't do anything except for the untap target creature thing that, like, Arcades doesn't already do. So it's just a little bit of help. It's like copies 5 through 8 of Arcades that can't attack. And I don't know how I feel about that, but you probably want at least a couple of copies in the deck. It helps those, you know, big toughness guys you just attacked with get back on defense. That's pretty nice. And I kind of like the way that it plays in flow with the rest of that deck, because that deck has a ton of 2 mana walls in it, you know. A couple of 1 mana guys, but it has this huge glut of 2 mana walls that it wants to play, because there's a pretty good spread of options at that mana slot. And then you play this on 3, Arcades on 4 if you didn't get this on 3, so it really plays in well with the amount of 2-drops that deck sort of feels forced to play. So I really kind of like that this is just help for that deck, and it also signals that if a card like this is in the set, it stands to reason that there will be a couple of defenders along the way somewhere. So that deck only stands to get better. I know a lot of players are pretty excited about that. So I'm sorry to put this card a little bit low on the quote list. Again, this is very loose ascending order, but I know that the hype is actually pretty real among certain segments of the Magic community for this card. But you want to talk about a goofy card? Here's Amplifier right here. It's 4 mana, 2 and 2 red for a 1/1 elemental. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Until your next turn, Amplifier's base power becomes twice that card's power, and its base toughness becomes twice that card's toughness. Put the revealed cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. This one goes to 11. I've already made all the jokes I want to make about this card on Twitter. This really is one of my favorite names for a Magic card ever. It's just super hokey and hilarious, and I miss when they made more cards like this. You know, it almost feels like an unglued card. or an uncard, you know. So I really kind of like this thing, and there's obviously a bunch of really dumb tricks, and they've all been said already at this point. You know, the card got spoiled late last night, and everyone was like, well, you play 4 of this, and 4 Galta, and Thud. You know, I mean, the deck makes itself, right? So I think this is going to be nothing more than a fun card, but it is going to be a very fun card. But you know, we also got kind of a lot of uncommon split cards today, and it was really interesting to see these, but I'll start with Carnival and Carnage. Carnival is just either a black or a red for an instant, and it deals 1 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and 1 damage to its controller. Carnage is 2 a red and a black for a sorcery. It deals 3 damage to target opponent, and that player discards 2 cards. That sounds kind of familiar. Okay, so the second half is just kind of blinding, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of where you want to be. But the first half, you know, you don't ignore it. At the same time, it's a fine card, too. It's going to snipe small stuff some of the time, probably more stuff than you would imagine, as a matter of fact, especially for just the 1 mana. It's not a bad investment. It's really, really easy to cast, and really importantly, it triggers Spectacle. That's super important, so there's actually a lot of play on this card. I'm not sure that either card is individually very playable, but put together there's a lot of versatility here, and that's a sign of a good split card. At the same time, if I had to pick a split card to play, I'd probably go with the other 2 that we saw today, starting with Depose and Deploy. Depose is 1 and then a hybrid white or blue mana for an instant. Tap target creature, draw a card. Deploy is 4 mana, 2 a white and a blue for an instant. Create 2 1/1 colorless Thopters with flying, and you gain 1 life for each creature you control. Now this, I really, really like, and it's actually tough to judge whether I like this or the next split card more, but the next split card is going to have obvious immediate impact in the format, so I have to save it until next. But let's live in the present. Let's talk about this card for now. This is actually more than fine, and there's a ton of play on this. You know, tap target creature, draw a card for just 2 mana is actually not terrible. It's really not. Especially in the early game when you're just trying to survive. Tap that big guy down. I'm not taking 3 from your Redonto here in the early game. And I'm going to draw a card. So this actually isn't a terrible play for just a couple of mana, and later on in the game you can even tap down big stuff, like really save your bacon. So I like that about it, but obviously the second half is fine too. This is decent against aggro. It can be played as a form of removal. It too can just stave off by blocking for a while, and it gains you at least the 2 life, if not a couple of more. It all depends, you know. This is mostly, you're going to see playing control decks, I would imagine, if it sees play. That's the home for it. You know? So this isn't an OP, you know, an overpowered card for a controller or anything, but it definitely looks like it could take up some amount of slots in that deck. But at the same time, again, it's control, so you're not going to be playing a whole lot of creatures. So this looks at least passing okay, and I will say, in like Murmuring Mystics decks where it's possible that you'll have like 3-4 other birds out, I actually really kind of like a card like this. You know, it's going to end up getting, you know, turning the corner for you, gaining you, you know, 4 or 5 life some of the time. And putting a couple of more flying guys out, for actually 3 more flying guys, if you have a Murmuring Mystic out when you play this. So there's an awful lot that I do like about this card. I think it's extremely versatile. And even though Control has a wide variety of really good options right now, I think this one is on the table for them. But let's get to it. Here's Canonize and Consume. Rough translation on this, because that doesn't quite follow the naming convention, but anyway, that's not the important part. The important part is the text on the card. Canonize is 1 and then a white or black hybrid for an instant. Exile target card from a graveyard and draw a card. Consume is 2 a white and a black for a sorcery. Target player sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control, and you gain life equal to that creature's power. Oh boy. Hot sauce Carnage Tyrant RIP. Seriously, this is very, very good. Specifically against Carnage Tyrant. Not a whole lot else. I guess Vinemare occasionally, and it's always going to kill the biggest thing on the other side of the board, and that's just the second half, you know. 4 mana is kind of a lot for a sorcery speed thing, but if it kills their Carnage Tyrant and gains you 7 life, you are cool with that, cowboy. This is a ridiculous card that's going to immediately impact the meta because Carnage Tyrant is so very important right now. So if I had to pick actually one of the best cards of the day as far as immediate impact on the meta, this is maybe right up there in like the number 1 or 2 slot. You know, this card is obviously going to be extremely playable at the very least out of sideboards, but possibly in main decks too. You know, this hoses Golgari in a variety of ways, considering the first half is also good for pulling stuff out of their graveyard so they can't. Fine Broker, Fine Finality, Memorial to Folly, the myriad ways they have of getting stuff out of the graveyard. You know, you can just take the best stuff out. They can't Eldritch Reborn the best creature in their graveyard back, so just the first half is fine too, and it draws you a card. 2 mana, instant speed, draw a card, and get the best card out of their graveyard is really, really impactful too. So there's a lot to like about this card, and I'm not sure that it makes the starting 60, but it's going to be in just about every 75 that can fit it. But speaking of nutsoid black removal, here's Bellow of the Carnarium right here. It's 3 mana, 1 and 2 black for sorcery. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. Exile all creature cards from all graveyards that were put there this turn. If a creature would die this turn, exile it instead. I don't even know if it's a question whether or not you play this or Golden Demise. I mean, I guess if you're playing some creatures, you'd think about Golden Demise, but in just about every other situation, this is the sideboard or even main deck card, possibly, that you might want. The Exile clause is incredibly important on this card for all kinds of reasons. There's a lot of ways to work out of your graveyard in this format, and I've already mentioned how well Golgari does it, but there's also Phoenix decks, and this works at least pretty well against some of those. You might have to take a hit from a Phoenix somewhere in there, but once you get back around to your turn, you can take care of the Phoenix or two and exile them forever, which is actually going to be important against those Arclight decks. And just, again, exiling creatures in general is a very good thing to be able to do. And note that even though this is a rough translation, the way this is worded, at least at time of recording here, is that if you, say, send a creature to a graveyard any other way, then that will exile it, even if you did it before you cast this spell. So if you went through combat or something and sent some creatures to their graveyard, or, you know, maybe you lightning striked a guy or something like that, and it put it in the graveyard, just casting this will exile all the things you've already removed. I really like that wording. So I'm a big fan of this. You know, the last time we saw, what was it, Flame Tendrils, a sort of version of this card in Standard, it saw its fair share of play, so I expect this to do the same. Well, this next guy's a little bit farther up the list than I would probably even like, but here's Growth Chamber Guardian. I kind of had to do all the split cards at the same time, you know, so, but still, Growth Chamber Guardian is 2 mana, 1 and a green, for a 2/2 Elf Crab Warrior. They're just going all out with creature types. In Simic for this set. It has 2 and a green to adapt to, and whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Growth Chamber Guardian, you may search your library for a card named Growth Chamber Guardian, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. You know, so often we talk about creatures replacing themselves. You know, they leave behind a token like the Afterlife ability, you know, or they, you know, draw a card when they come into play. They replace themselves. This guy literally can replace himself. You know, if he's the target of removal, or if he dies in combat or something, you can just adapt at instant speed, and bing bang, you got yourself another crab elf. I love this creature type. They've been doing that a lot lately. They've been impressing me with the creature types. I think that somebody at WotC is like, why don't we just slap weird creature types on everything? And I love it. You should keep doing that. Simic's a good excuse for it, but outside of the ridiculous flavor of the card, I actually think that it's okay. I don't necessarily like how it lines up with other 2-drops in the format, I'll say that much, but I do like that for a sizable mana investment, it can replace itself, and I am kind of looking for that out of my 2-drop, you know. And 1 copy can end up snowballing into 4 copies before you know it, and it's got the proper creature type, not crab. It is the proper creature type, but elf, you know, at least it's a 2-drop elf that can find more copies of itself. So the elf deck might actually want to play that, you know. So I like a lot about this card. Again, it's a little bit higher up here in the video than I probably would have expected it to be, even myself. But I do think there's a lot to like about it. It's a very interesting card. And even though the mana investment is very, very high to get extra copies of this, it's probably still worth it in the right situations, you know. Not only are you getting another copy of this, but you're also getting a 4/4 guy. But do remember that if you have open mana, again, if it gets targeted with a Lightning Strike or Lava Coil, whatever, you can just go search up another copy. And I think that's the most important thing about the card, is that it is sort of removal proof for a hefty investment. But do note that it works really well with the other Simic 2-drop that we saw yesterday. I was going to say like the other day. It was just yesterday, actually. Time moves weirdly in spoiler season, but it's the Simic 2-drop that like makes activated abilities cost 2 less. And it can tap to make a creature adapt more than once. Those are kind of the bread and butter of what is becoming the Simic Adapt deck. But even though we've only seen 30% of the set, Remember, I'll kind of check myself by saying that. We've only seen a little less than a third of the set in total. It is kind of looking like Adapt right now is, Merfolk 2019, like a deck that is good, undeniably good and fun to play, but never, going to be tier 1 material. But again, we've got a lot more to see from the Simic Guild, and I really hope that they can put something fun together. At least fun. It's looking like it's trending towards fun, but here's hoping for competitive. Let's check out Earth right here. End Raise Forerunners, 8 mana, 5 and 3 green for a 7/7 boar with Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. Nice. And when it enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain Vigilance and Trample until end of turn. That too sounds familiar. So I guess between this and Decimator of Provinces, just like all Craterhoof Behemoth reprints from here on out are just going to be pigs. This is a pig ability for some reason, But actually, I think this one is not as good as Decimator, or obviously Craterhoof. It is the worst version of it that they produced. Like with Decimator, you could cheat it out, and that was just insane. But with this, you can't do that. I think it makes it a little bit worse altogether, but it's still a freaking good card. 8 mana is a crazy investment, but when it comes to ramping this out, or maybe even reanimating it, both good options for this. It's a great top into a ramp deck because you've probably played a couple of dudes up to then, probably just mana dorks, and this doesn't work the way you necessarily want it to with mana dorks, but at the same time, this is still a huge bonus to your team. And it itself can attack. That was something else that was crazy about Decimator, is the haste. And this has that, plus 2 other abilities and a freaking enormous body. So I actually do like a lot about this. The Enter the Battlefield trigger is really enticing. But, a lot of people are kind of discounting this card. Boo, ho, hum. But I actually think there's a shine in its eye. I think there might be something special about this one. Don't overlook it, is all I'm saying. A lot of people are roasting this pig, but I'm not quite ready to go to the luau yet. I hate my own puns. But still, all I'm saying is just keep your eye on this guy. I think with the right Reanimator or Ramp Shell, this thing could actually be an attractive option. But check out Rakdos, the Showstopper. 6 mana, 4, a black and a red for a 6/6 legendary demon with flying and trample, flample. And when Showstopper enters the battlefield, flip a coin for each creature that isn't a demon, devil, or imp. Destroy each creature whose coin comes up tails. This is a hilarious commander. I just kind of want to say that about it. I'm not too much more excited about it than for any format other than EDH, where it is nothing more than a hilarious commander. Once you play it, it's not. I guess people can't really hate you that much. It's not really a politics thing. It's like it's out of my hands once I play it, bro. I hope your heads or your coins come up heads. But still, fun looking commander. I'm not sure how much play it sees in standard, but this is another decent, at least maybe Reanimator option, right? 6 mana is kind of the threshold for reanimating creatures. The low end of the threshold. You usually want to really get some bang for your buck in terms of reanimating stuff. 7 and 8 mana creatures. But this is a fine option because the Enter the Battlefield trigger is actually not bad. It's out of your hands. That's another thing. I've already said that, but in constructed Magic, that really matters. You want to be able to control more. It's possible that your opponent has 3 creatures and you completely whiff, but that still leaves you behind a 6/6 flying trample guy, so there's nothing wrong with that either. As far as 6 mana options go, I think that it's not the best thing we have in Standard by any stretch, but there's at least a very outside chance that it sees some real competitive play. But if nothing else, it's probably going to see a lot of real fun Commander play for a very long time. There's going to be that jerk that likes a card like this, is all I'm saying. But let's check out Skargan Hellkite right here. It's 5 mana, 3 and 2 red for a 4/4 dragon with Riot, pretty nice, and flying, because dragons fly. And it's pay 4 mana, 3 and a red. Skargan Hellkite deals 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets. Activate this ability only if Skargan Hellkite has a +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, so this is good. I've got a lot to say about this. They've been fixing Glorybringer a lot lately. This quarter of seems like a fixed version. You bring it down as a 4/4 haste and just go ahead and hit face, and that's fine. In the Dragons deck, this probably looks like a better 5 mana option than something like Demanding Dragon. Although I have stood behind Demanding Dragon before, and I intend to do so in the future. I think it's a fine card. But this looks a little bit better for all intents and purposes, and I mean that phrase this time. I tend to throw it around, but I mean it for just about everything you could intend to do. This probably is a better card than Demanding Dragon. I really like the mana sink on this. I like that it can take out 2 small guys some of the time, or that 1 small guy and, you know, ping you for a damage or ping your planeswalker or something. There's some really, really cool stuff about that ability that just plays. It has a lot of play on it, is all I'm saying. Or you can just, like, hit your opponent over and over in the face. That also seems fine. So this is a great mana sink. It's a fine threat when you first play it. If you don't give it the haste, it's a great mana sink, I should say. But if you do just want to give it the haste, if that's advantageous, you can hit for 8 with this in just a couple of turns. So if you need to go with the sort of blitzkrieg strategy, this is great for that. But if you need to play a sort of longer, more methodical game, pick that guy off, swing in, then this card is great for that too. It's got a lot of competition at this mana slot. Doom Whisperer, Lyra Dawnbringer, there's a lot of things it has to stack up against, and it doesn't necessarily stack up against well. So if it's not, you know, if it doesn't end up being a heavily played card, it's going to be because there are a lot of roadblocks, especially when it comes to big flyers at this particular mana cost. But that doesn't mean I'm going to count it out entirely. Again, I especially like the way that it can take over a game if it's just left on the board unchecked. Let's check out Prime Speaker's Zanaffar. That's a name. It's 4 mana, 2, a green and a blue for a 2/4 elf ooze wizard. Good lord, the creature types. Tap and sacrifice another creature. Search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost equal to 1 plus the sacrifice creature's converted mana cost. Then put that card onto the battlefield and shuffle your library. Activate this ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. That too sounds familiar. So yeah, it's Birthing Pod, but probably worse because you can just kill it. Lava Coil kills your Birthing Pod in Standard right now, and I don't know how I feel about that. But this is obviously proven to be a historically busted ability, so, I mean, I can't say the card is bad. I literally can't, you know. I think it's kind of smack dab in the middle of this makeshift slapdash thing we're calling a list here, you know. So obviously I'm not incredibly hype about it. Again, I don't like that it's only the 4 toughness, you know, which I know sounds high, but at the cost of 4 mana, I'm not really sure how much it lines up with the rest of the format. That's the problem with a lot of the cards we've been seeing in this spoiler season, is that I'm not sure how well they line up with currently existing important cards in Standard. And this is definitely one of them, you know, so, but that said, if you even get 1 turn with it, then you can probably do something really, really gross, just something filthy. So this is probably a fine card, but it's one of those cards you very likely have to untap with before it's any good, and I'm not a big fan of those cards in Standard, especially at this kind of hefty mana cost when there are so many cards that are either resilient or, you know, have some sort of enter the battlefield value or something they do for you other than just be, you know, chitsy. You know what I mean? This is a quirky, you know, kitschy kind of creature that can do some fun stuff. Yes, I'm not denying the power of this exact, all of that text. That text is good, but, you know, at 4 mana on a creature, especially in Standard, I'm just not sure that it's going to get there. But who am I? You know, I'm just some fatty. But anyway, here's Seraph of the Scales. It's 4 mana, 2, a white, and a black for a 4/3 angel with flying. And you can pay a white to have it gain Vigilance until end of turn, or you can pay a black to have it gain Death Touch until end of turn. And it's also got Afterlife 2. And in case you're unfamiliar, it just means that it'll create 2 1/1 flying spirit guys. Spirit Lord getting better every day, man. These Afterlife guys might actually be a thing, like Esper Spirits. I really kind of doubt it, but it's still. I think this card is actually very good in a lot of ways. It's just a beast in combat, and we'll actually see that with a couple of the Orzhov creatures today, is that they actually do really, really interesting things in combat. And I like this. I actually do think that this lines up fairly well against a lot of stuff. Not Rekindling Phoenix, not Lyra Dawnbringer, but against most of the other creatures in the format, period. Not just the big flyers at, you know, comparable mana cost. I think this lines up actually really, really well. You know, against Carnage Tyrant, it's got the Death Touch. That's nice. But the coolest thing about this card is that it's got an evasive ability like flying, and you can swing over with Vigilance, you know, and then leave it up to still be able to get Death Touch. And it just makes blocking really difficult for the opponent, because if the opponent decides to block, then they're going to lose their guy. You're just going to give it Death Touch. They will lose their guy. But if your opponent decides to not block it, you've still got it left up for defense. So they have a really hard time, like, getting in a profitable attack against this thing if it's still left up, you know? So this just threatens to kill anything on attacks or blocks and really stay up. You get free attacks with this, where you're just saying, I dare you to block this with your big flyer that's not Lyra Dawnbringer. So I really actually do like a lot about this card. And needless to say, it makes strategies like, you know, Black-White or even Mardu Angels actually really good, or at least tempting. But let's take a look at Precognitive Perception right here. It's 5 mana, 3 and 2 blue for an instant. You draw 3 cards. But, addendum, if you cast this spell during your main phase, instead you scry 3 and then draw 3. So Jace's Ingenuity is looking like a much better card nowadays. We used to play the 1-2 of Ingenuity and Control decks. It's going to be no different here, but now that we have a strictly upgraded one. You know, by the time that you're in the late game with Control, you don't mind casting this in your main phase at all, especially if you have Teferi out. Bing, boom, you know, that's effectively just costs 3 mana in that case. So this looks like a very good slam dunk card for me that Control's probably only going to play 1 or 2 copies of again, just like Ingenuity. But it's still, again, slam dunk. I think this is a guaranteed inclusion on some level for some, you know, dedicated Control decks. Because drawing 3 is a fistful already, but when you actually do have the mana to cast this on your main phase and not have to worry about it so much in the later game, especially considering you've dug a lot into your library at that point, once you can scry 3, you're just guaranteeing, almost guaranteeing, virtually, that you get the answers that you need or the win condition that you want. Being able to look at up to 6 cards is absolutely crazy, again, one more time, especially that late into the game. So I think this is a very good card, and I haven't seen too many people dumping on it or anything. People are mostly saying it's a good card, but I think it's even better than that. It is a pretty nearly guaranteed at least one of in every blue-white Control list. But let's move on to Ravager Worm. This is 6 mana, 3 a red and 2 green for a 4/5 worm with Riot. When Ravager Worm enters the battlefield, choose up to 1. Ravager Worm fights target creature you don't control, or destroy target land with an activated ability that isn't a mana ability. Well, it's good. This is one of those, it's almost sad because this card is almost undeniably good, but in a format with Carnage Tyrant, it's really difficult to see it seeing a ton of play, you know, unless Carnage Tyrant is just completely pushed out of the format, maybe by, you know, that Black-White split card that we saw earlier. I really doubt it. But, I mean, in a situation where that does happen, or when Carnage Tyrant eventually rotates, this might be the 6-drop du jour for a lot of decks. It doesn't hose Control the way Carnage Tyrant does, and so it's a very different card. But you've only got room for so many 6-drops in your deck, you know? So I really don't think you can play this alongside Carney 2, you know? But as far as the actual function of the card outside of the, you know, outside of the meta, just in a vacuum, actually really good. For 6 mana, you get a really big guy that, whether or not it has haste, it's a pretty solid body, and it will almost always kill a guy when it enters the battlefield. That is unbelievable, you know. Or it'll just bust up an Azcanta or something like that, or an Odonto. You know, there's a lot of different things that this can destroy. Detection Tower? I don't know what you're worried about, but this can blow up a bunch of different lands if that's what you want from it. And there's probably a few different important targets in Standard as far as that's concerned, but I really like the ability to just be an oversized Ravenous Chupacabra and kill a guy and leave this giant body behind. This kind of 2-for-1 is definitely worth it for 6 mana, whether you give it the haste or not. If you do give it the haste, this is ridiculously swingy, you know? I think this is Glorybringer levels of swingy in that you play it, you kill that huge guy, and you get in for a big attack that same turn. So that is just incredibly swingy. I like a lot of what this card is doing, but again, you know, in a format where Carnage Tyrant has the almost same casting cost, I really don't see this seeing a lot of play, and that kind of makes me sad. But here's Pestilence Spirit right here. This is one of my low-key favorite cards of the day. It's 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 3/2 Spirit with Menace and Death Touch. Instant and sorcery spells you control have Death Touch. Look at that. Altogether, I fear that this might be a little bit too cute. The 2 toughness especially scares me. It's a super removable for a 3 mana investment. I'm not sure how much I like that. It doesn't just die to removal, it dies to like all the removal. But in the meantime, some really cool stuff about it, you know? It's got 3 power, and it's kind of unblockable. Like, it's got Menace and Death Touch. So if they choose to block it, they're losing 2 guys, which they don't want to do, I would imagine, most of the time. So unless they're just trading a couple of small tokens for it, they probably can't find a way to block this to their advantage, so it's almost unblockable. And if you do cast Shocks or Lightning Strikes, or even a little bit more esoteric stuff, you know? People have been talking about Dual Shot And especially Cosmotronic Wave, that one is hilarious, as just like a one-sided board wipe, with this guy out. So there's definitely a super fun budget deck that we can make out there, and I can't wait to brew that up because it looks hilarious. But I'm not sure that I really picture this being at the top tables or anything. Hopefully I eat those words because I love the card, but as it is, this looks like budget territory to me, but that's where I live, so I'm really happy about this card. But here's Spawn of Mayhem right here. Ridiculous names for Rakdos cards, or pretty much every card, but still. 4 mana, 2 and 2 black for a 4/4 demon with Spectacle, 1 and 2 black. And it has Flying and Trample, it's Flample guy. And at the beginning of your upkeep, Spawn of Mayhem deals 1 damage to each player. Then if you have 10 or less life, you put a +1/+1 counter on Spawn. I love this. I really, really do. This is a very, very nice mana investment, even if you don't get a discount on it. 4/4 flying trample guy is pretty decent, and it's going to hit everybody for a damage a turn. That's fine. That also, by the way, triggers Spectacle, which is an important thing to remember about the card. So once you get this guy out, if you can keep a copy of him out, then further copies of him you'll almost always get the discount on. So love that about him. He's just extra free damage every turn, too, for what it's worth. And once he actually puts your own life total in jeopardy, then he just starts getting bigger and bigger every turn. Eventually, he'll outclass Doom Whisperer. It harkens back to Suicide Black. That used to be a real deck back in the day, the black aggro deck that didn't mind doing damage to itself. In fact, that was kind of part of its game plan. And this really reminds me of that. It's just a big, fat threat for a very, very cheap cost. And even though it does hit you every turn, it also hits your opponent and eventually will get bigger and bigger. This card has playable written all over it. Hey, what's an uncommon doing all the way up here? This is Wilderness Reclamation. It's 4 mana, 3 and a green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control. Whew, this is wild. That's a good... They are reclaiming wild. This is a whole different level right here. This is 4 mana, which is kind of a lot. But it's a relatively difficult to deal with enchantment or permanent type, and it's just very good in a lot of decks, I think a lot of commander decks with access to green are obviously going to want this card, but even in standard, this looks really, really good in Turbo Fog, kind of grossly good in Turbo Fog, and a lot of other control decks. Bant or Sultai might actually want a copy or two of a card like this, especially if they're playing things with Addendum. Works really well with Addendum, obviously, but it works well with lots and lots of things you might be wanting to do. Just the ability to play whatever you want during your turn and still be able to hold up removal and counter spells or settle the wreckage or whatever during your opponent's turn is just super busted. And even though it costs you a slot and you take off turn 4 or whenever you end up actually playing this, in Bant Fog, one of the reasons it's good is because you don't play it on turn 4. You probably play this a lot later on in the game. But still, there are some there's some opportunity cost to playing this card, yes. But the benefits are insane and exactly the right kind of deck. But it turns out a lot of decks are the right kind of deck. So I really like this effect. People are going absolutely gaga over this thing, and I don't blame them. Because if only for commander play, I can see people freaking out about this. But I do think there's a lot of relevance in standard for this card. But let's move on to Gutterbones. This is the newest card at time of recording that we've seen so far. This is just 1 black mana for a 2/1 Skeleton Warrior, and it enters the battlefield tapped. But you can pay 1 and a black to return it from your graveyard to your hand. Activate this ability only during your turn and only if an opponent lost life this turn. Also love that there's sort of a call out to it in the flavor text, or at least that's I read it that way. But in any case, this card's good. I'm just now seeing this card for the first time. I reloaded Mythic Spoiler. I've still got 2 more cards from today to talk about so far. There might be another before this recording is all said and done, but this is fresh. I have known about this card's existence for literally 30 seconds at this point, but it's good. It's a 2-power 1-drop. That's good. It's got recursion. That's really good. So I like so much about this, especially in a format that is probably going to have a lot of spectacle payoffs, things that do a small amount of damage for a small mana investment, in which case this card is really good, and it's just fine in aggro, period. Just period. This is a fair card in aggro, goes really well in the Judith deck, so yeah, this is an obvious, just boom, slam dunk, windmill 360, standard playable, gonna be in the black aggro decks, the black based aggro decks. and probably works well whether you're playing in Orzhov or Rakdos. So this is good, and maybe we can actually make tribal skeletons a thing now. We got this and Archer and reassembling skeleton. Like let's do a lot with this. I like 1-mana 2/1s, especially recursive 1-mana 2/1s, and this really checks all the boxes for me. This is a really hype card.
Did you think death would free you from your obligation?
But oh well, here's Pitiless Pontiff.
When the system fails,
black and a white
without
vampire spirits. He won and sacrificed.
This is cruel territory now.
The priest wears Prada. I don't even have to pontificate about this one. This is a good card. We all want a free sacrifice outlet. I'll give it to you. A lot of people, I think, in the early stages of this card being spoiled, because it's still relatively new, are a little sad that it's not free, but that doesn't mean we won't get a real free sacrifice outlet. That said, it's only 1 mana, that's as low as it goes, and it's a really low mana investment to get things started. Just 2 mana, same as Dark Dweller Oracle, but this is actually on color for the Orzhov Aristocrats type deck. Although that deck is looking more and more Mardu by the day, isn't it? But this is a great 2-drop. This is yet another 2-drop that can go indestructible along with the Danto Vanguard. And both of them are vampires, by the way. Note that. So, again, the creature type is actually really relevant on this card, I think. But a lot of people are a little disappointed too, I think. At least, again, in the early stages from some of the feedback I've seen on the card. People are a little disappointed in the activated ability in general, and I think that's crazy. Like, yeah, I want some sort of repeatable value, something I can do more than once in a turn that does more than just the one thing. Redundancy here is a bad thing. But at the same time, Death Touch and Indestructible are like kind of 2 of the best abilities you can put together in a combat situation. So this thing makes, again, just like the Angel we covered earlier, I was talking about how Orzhov makes combat a headache for the opponent. This is another good example of that. You swing in with this, they got to be really, really careful about blocking it. And they got to be really, really careful about what else they block, for that matter. Because you have the option of sacrificing something that's going to die anyway on blocks. So it's a really powerful card on attacks, even though it's just a 2/2, but on defense, it's equally ridiculous. If you have something that you don't mind throwing away or getting a dice trigger on, maybe it has afterlife or something, then you can block with this, kill their guy, keep this out, and, activate you get a death trigger or whatever. So this is actually ridiculous in a lot of ways. I know that in combat you still have to lose a guy to keep this. So it's in check a little bit, but again, in decks that don't mind losing guys anyway, this card is just absolutely crazy. It extends the game in the early game in a way. And even in the late game, it makes it to where they can't necessarily even get in with a Carnage Tyrant on you. So I really like a lot about this card. And I'm thinking it's obviously gonna be a key piece in whatever Aristocrats deck ends up being a thing. Even if we get a free sacrifice outlet, it's entirely likely we still play this as our 2-drop. But last card of the day, so far at least, this is Teysa Karlov, ladies and gentlemen, 4 mana, 2, a black and a white for a 2/4 human advisor. It's legendary. And if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Oh boy, creature tokens you control have vigilance and lifelink. Nobody's talking about the second line of text, but it's actually a really, really good line of text. It gives all your Afterlife guys 3 abilities now, Flying, Vigilance, Lifelink. That's good stuff. Right then and there, but it also pairs well with like Divine Visitation, Vigilance and Lifelink to your 4/4 Flying Angels. There's a lot of cool things about that second ability. But obviously it's the sort of Panharmonicon-esque first ability that everyone's talking about. This does an awful lot of really cool things in just about every format, but especially standard. Like with this out, all of your Afterlife guys, when they die, will produce double the amount of flying tokens. That's really good. Obviously works well with the Linda, but again, I don't like that they cost the same thing. I think that's really prohibitive. But it's still a great interaction, and this is a ridiculous card in and of itself. And there's 100 things you could name in standard. People have talked about Conclave Cavalier. I don't know if that's quite good enough, even though you are making 8 power. You're making 4 2/2 vigilance guys. That seems nice. But there's a ton of other death triggers you can take advantage of in standard. Open the Graves. There's a bunch. So even though I haven't seen too much, other than maybe Judith and Afterlife that I'm super excited about with this card. I'm almost sure that we'll see even more, especially as Standard rolls on after this set. There's obviously going to be even more death triggers, and you always got to keep this thing in the back of your mind, because this could do some truly busted stuff depending on what we see. It's always going to be a sleeper while it's in Standard until the day that it becomes a very, very real card. But I'm pretty sure that I'm tapped out for now. I just reloaded Mythic Spoiler one more time. It looks like we're in the clear for now, but that was like 22 cards to talk about. I hope you guys are still here, and I'm really happy if you still are. Thanks for supporting the channel. You have no idea what a high watch time does for me. It's very, very nice. But that's all I've got to talk about for now. But, you know, make sure that you do all the YouTube stuff, and do make sure you're subscribed. It's actually important, because my exclusive spoiler comes out on the 10th, and I can't say anything about it, but you're going to want to be subscribed to make sure you get it. This is my favorite exclusive preview that I've ever gotten, and it's actually, no, I can't even say that. I was going to say something super vague about it, but I can't give anything away about it, and I'm not going to. Just make sure that you're subscribed so that on the 10th of this month, you see my exclusive preview. It's crazy. And also check out TCG Player if you want to get into the pre-order game on any of these, or you just need like a price guide, like a barometer to see where all these cards are right now in the community, and you want a good, good way of gauging that is kind of a price guide. So if that's all you're looking for, just click the first link in the description. That'll take you over to TCG Player. You can spec on some of these cards. And aside from that, if you really want to help the channel out, go on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/SBMTG, or click the link in the description. All I ask is $1 a month, and I'll let you know what decks are coming up next, and more importantly, a lot of the time, I'll let you vote on what decks you want to see next. That's really important at the beginning of a format, which you're about to be in. You can affect YouTube history. So throw me $1 a month if you can swing it over there on Patreon, and it'll really help the channel out a lot. You have no freaking clue. But aside from that, I'm pretty sure I'm done. You guys didn't get to see Ziggy much this video, but he is right here. He prioritized my awesome shirt. He was a good dude and was like, oh, everybody's got to see that Chuck Mangione shirt, man. I got to lay down here. But he's been a good dude. He's been here with me the entire video, in case you didn't know. But in any case, I'm pretty sure I'm actually done for this one. So I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.